Peace and blessings, Omo House. This is Ja Rain coming at you one more Sunday. It is actually really late for me, but it's been a very intensive, busy, very filled day. But I sort of was thinking to myself, well, do you want to not do the message, or do you want to do a small message, or do you want to do a spoken word message? And the truth of the matter is, there was something that was on my heart for a couple of weeks, and then I think with the transition of our dear sacred brother, Muhammad Ali, I thought, you know what? Let it flow how it flows, and if it's a very short message, that's fine, but at least you have kept your commitment to planting some words of wisdom in the community. So with that, let me share that oftentimes I will have a thought, a feeling, and I'll put it on my refrigerator, and there are like tentative titles or ideas that I'd like to share with the community. And this particular one, which I'll share in a moment, has been on my refrigerator for a while. And I think it was based on a number of conversations that I've had with folk who, no matter what I seem to say about my experience being a black woman, they look at me like I have three heads. And so I don't know how deeply I'll go into it today, but this became sort of the impetus, the inspiration. So what's on my refrigerator? What's on my refrigerator is the following three words: black, like me. And then what happens, it got crossed out and it was black, like us. And then it got crossed out again and it's black, like we. And under all of that is body, mind, spirit. And I think what my hope was to have a very authentic, vulnerable, intimate conversation about the experiences of walking through this life in my black body. And there's a level of pain and sadness and frustration, as well as joy and possibility, that I have when I walk in my life with this black body. But oftentimes I find myself disappointed by the reality of being a black woman in 2016. Often I find myself not seen in my full humanity. And, you know, of course I ask myself, well, am I playing any part of that? And I think that's what led to today's title. As I was watching some of the responses of people around the death of Muhammad Ali, it was interesting what people chose to remember. Okay, let me clarify. It was interesting what certain white people chose to remember. What I could tell from most people of color, African-descended people, there was this sense of pride that Muhammad Ali represented a very empowered, courageous, fearless human being, very fearless, courageous black man. And so what you began to see was this honoring of his legacy. But then I would look at other communities, and there would be statements like, yeah, but he was a commie, or he was a white hater, or he was a racist, he was a draft dodger, he hated white people, or, he hated America because he refused to go to the draft, and all this stuff. And I think that's what led to today's title, because I think it sort of touches on, not as deeply as I plan to at some point, but it touches on my experience, and what I believe is maybe a lot of Black folks' experience. And what that is that we live in this country, and often we have what we believe is good seed. And good seed might be our dreams, our hopes, our attitudes, our vision for our lives, our brilliance, our creativity. So we have this seed. But the challenge comes when it comes to planting that seed in good soil or fertile soil or inviting soil. And so I think what I was thinking about is there's this idea that when you live in America, you can be everything that you want to be. That, part of the American dream is that, the sky is the limit. But the truth is, for many people of color, for women, for LGBTQ, did I remember the T? If I didn't remember the T, I'm throwing a T in. We have these abilities, these desires, but we often are confronted with soil that is hard, or soil that lacks nutrients, or soil that is not befitting the seed, because every soil ain't for every seed. And so when I thought about the soil and the seed, that somehow brought me back to this desire to tell the story. What is the story for many of us, those who live on the margins? What is the soil that we are given? Are we given a hardened soil? Are we manipulated to believe that we are actually getting some soil, but then as soon as we plant our seed, the powers that be come and dig it up, so that we're never able to take root? And so, I've been thinking, what do I want to share about my experience, which hopefully will maybe address a global experience. So, what is it like to be a Black woman in America? For all of the Black women, take a moment and reflect. What is your life like in terms of where are you invited to be your best self? Where are you acknowledged as having good seed? When you walk into environments, how often do you think your humanity is embraced? I know for me, it is very rare that I'm in an environment where I feel myself being fully human, and where I really get that my seed, whatever that seed may be, my gift of conversation, my insight, any wisdom that I have, my professionalism, my ambition, my humor, my joy, any of those seeds that I bring, very rarely when I'm in the wider world do I feel that my seed is honored. And then when I think about the soil, and of course this is a metaphor for those of you who are like, what's seed, what's soil? Metaphor, allegory. What is the soil that I'm presented in the world? Well, if soil represents some sort of foundation and stability, if soil represents a place that I can speak my true voice, if soil represents community, if soil represents the possibilities, if soil represents a kinship, then oftentimes I wonder, is there a willingness on the part of America to have me plant my seed authentically as it is? Or do I have to change my walk and my talk and my flow and my vision? Is that the only way that my seed will be acceptable? And then when I think about the possibility that seed plus soil really represents my story, not just parts of my story that make people comfortable, but the part of the story that tells my true legacy, my true history, my authentic experience of being a Black woman in America, I often ask myself, does the world want to hear my story? Or do they want a whitewashed version of my story? Do they want a palatable, comfort-making, non-guilt-inspiring version of that story? But the truth of the matter is, if my seed is a sunflower, but there is a condition for planting my sunflower that says, once you've been planted, please do not come out of the earth as a sunflower. Make sure you come out as a lily. And get it, there's no qualification like sunflowers are better than lilies, but if you are asking me to be other than who I am, then you don't really want my seed. Or if I'm allowed to plant my seed, but then the environment lacks the appropriate condition, which means the sun might shine, but we're going to block that sun from getting to your seed. Or, yes, it might rain, we might provide water, but you know what? We're going to enclose your particular seedling so that you never get water. Then the question becomes, how can you say that you want my seed to grow and thrive if you are continually trying to kill me or prevent me from being nurtured and nourished? And then, of course, what I think about, despite your desire to either have me be planted or not, the most difficult part is when I begin to tell my story. If I begin to tell my story about what it feels like to not be planted in fertile soil, if I begin to tell my story about what it feels like to never have sunlight on my face, if I begin to tell the story of what it feels like to never really have enough water, if the response is, we don't want to hear your story, oh, you know that story that you're telling us, that is not true. We have always given you enough water. We have always allowed you to feel the sun on your face. That minimizes and dismisses my experience. And so I say all of that to say that this metaphor of seed and soil and story and the inability to plant that seed or be nurtured in that soil or have my story be heard and acknowledged and validated is really what is under the experience of being Black like me. And so I think I just wanted to till the soil a little bit Because where I'd like to go with this in the future is to say the things that we don't often say. To speak a truth to this experience that is not concerned with being ashamed, that is not concerned with, well, these are the secrets that we keep. To tell a story that trust that the wider culture is strong enough and ready enough and courageous enough to hear, to listen, to see, not with the external eye or ear, but with the inner conscious eye and ear, what it is like to live in a country that has not been willing to hear the stories, to see the seed as good, to provide a fertile soil so that we may truly plant ourselves. And so that's what I got. I am tilling the soil for a future conversation. I am digging my hands in the dirt, preparing the way for a seedling that will be planted. And I am ringing the bell for a new story, for a new listening, for a new narrative that speaks an uncomfortable yet timely story. And I think this was mostly re-inspired by the 2016 version of Roots, also inspired by watching some of the videos of our brother Muhammad Ali and seeing the courageous conversation that he was willing to have 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when it was really radical. But the thing that was interesting to me was I got that the conversation that he was having, the seed that he was planting, the soil that he was attempting to till, the narrative that he was presenting to a global community has not changed. And so for me, if we have been telling the same story for 40 years, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, maybe it's time to look at the soil that we are attempting to plant within. Maybe it's time to look at the community's inability to listen. And maybe if I begin to speak to other seeds that are just like me, who are attempting to plant seeds in soil that's very similar to the soil that I come from, the soil that I'm committed to being within, then maybe the conversation shifts, the listenership shifts, the conditions for planting become different. And so, yes, I know that was a crazy metaphor, and it will take the best of y'all and the brightest of y'all to be like, what was she saying? Hope it was clear enough, but it was definitely allegorical and metaphorical, and that's okay. But if you get the meaning of seed, and you get the meaning of soil, and you get the meaning of story, this will take root within your own consciousness and literally do its own thing. So may you be blessed. Have an amazing, extraordinary, phenomenal, powerful week. And I will check you next week. Peace.